Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be experimenting with doing trees in winter. Now I've done a quick watercolour wash as a background and I'm starting off using this Matthew Palmer branch and detail brush, which is quite clever because it has a sable reservoir and a synthetic tip, so it holds a lot of paint and it also gives you very fine lines. So quite a clever little brush for doing trees and bushes and things. So I'm working on a dry background, a dry wash, and I'm just adding watercolour tree, doing the outlines of branches, no leaves because it's supposed to be in winter. And I'm just using a burnt sienna colour, I guess. Now this is a sable brush, a number 6. And I'm using it just to add some water to re-wet the branches and make it look like there's more branches than I've actually drawn. So you don't want to cover the whole thing with water, you want to leave some spaces in between for where the light would come through. So this is my number 1, watercolour on a dry background. For the next tree, I'm going to be using these Derwent Aquatone sticks. This is number 63, which is Venetian Red. Now, Derwent describes them as solid watercolour sticks. So watercolour paint in a stick, if you like. These are quite versatile. They draw quite pale and they look a bit like wax crayons when you first draw them, but as soon as you put water with them they change completely. I'm also using this one, which is a number 36 indigo, just to darken the shadows on one side. Now here I've got a sable brush, a number 3, which I'm just going to draw in the detail and also add some water to make the branches look a little bit more realistic, add some more detail. So this is number 2, Derwent Aquatone on dry wash. This is a Derwent watercolour pencil number 54, Burnt Umber. So again, it's a watercolour pencil, so when you add water to it, it will change colour and give you quite a nice result. See how much darker it goes when you add the water. And watercolour pencils are quite controllable. So Derwent watercolour pencil on a dry wash. Now this is a Stabilo 0.88 and it is a fine nib pen in a 0.4 nib size, and this one is brown. I use these a lot in my drawings, my paintings, to add details. And they're great because when you add water to them, the ink changes colour and it just gives a really nice result. But don't try and use them as a waterproof pen because they are not. That is the beauty of them, I think, that the fact that they are not waterproof. So the ink mixes well. Right, this one is a Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pen with a fine nib in sepia, and it is waterproof, and I will show you the difference. So I will again draw the bare skeleton of the tree, and this time when we add the water nothing will happen. So here I am adding water and I'm not getting the leaves or anything. So this is a Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pen on a dry wash. Now I'm trying out here, and this is an experiment, I haven't done this before, with a wet wash using the same pen. Now what I did find was I had to keep using a scrap of paper to get the ink going again, because once you put it into the wet it stops working. So that was Faber-Castell Pitt pen on a wet wash. Now I'm just doing another sky. Here we have some Hobbycraft felt tip pens. Now these are really cheap, they're in the children's section. I think they were under £2 and I used them on my Christmas tags if you watch those videos. I'm using the brown, obviously, to just draw a quick bare bones again of the tree. These are not waterproof, so you can re-wet them and they give a really nice effect. So for very cheap pens, great. This is a Unipin 0.5 size nib black ink from the Tiger store, which is a Danish store chain. It says it's waterproof and fade proof. Well, it's not waterproof, so I have no idea whether it's fade proof, but it does give quite a nice effect. So when you compare it to the Pick pen, you can see how it does blend in quite nicely. Maybe not as water soluble as the Stabilo, but still they are water soluble, not waterproof. Now, out of all these, which do I consider was my most successful? Well, I like the watercolour on the dry background. I like the Derwent Aquatone and the Stabilo pen, and also the Hobbycraft water-soluble marker. Just drawing in a little base there so that my trees aren't floating. And now we come to Winsor & Newton drawing ink in peat brown. I haven't really used these much. I've got them in loads of different colours, but I've never really used them. So this is a first. They are waterproof once they're dry. So let's see what happens. I'm using my Sable number 3 brush again. And now I'm going to come in with a liner brush from Daler Rowney, which is a size 0, just to put in some finer branches. Now it is waterproof, so when you add the water you need to add a little bit more ink. And you can mix the ink then in with water. So that gives quite a nice effect. And if you do another layer, then it will go darker, just like with watercolour paints. Now I'm going to start doing some experimental ones, and this one is I'm going to wet down the wash, and then I'm going to just add watercolour wet into wet. I would probably not do it entirely like this. I would do some dry and then some more wet into wet. But it was a good experiment. Now I'm wetting it down again, and this time I'm going to use the Derwent Aquatint stick and see what happens there. It draws really nicely into the water and you can see it changing colour. I like this. So Derwent Aquatone into wet wash. Now I'm going to do the Hobbycraft marker wet into wet and see what happens with that. It definitely is not as dark when you do it into wet, so you might want to go in afterwards and darken it. The next one is dry and wet into wet watercolour. So using watercolour again. So I'm now going to wet down the watercolour and add some more. This is more like an autumn tree, so I decided I'd add a little bit of green and a little bit of red to make sure that when it was still had leaves on it. And the last one I'm going to do is something different. Now what I really should have is a stylus, but I couldn't find my stylus, so I'm using scissors, and what I'm doing is making indentations on the paper. You have to do this with dry paper, and then after you've done the indentations you add a wet wash. Now adding the wash here, and you might vaguely be able to see the indentations. It didn't work that well. You can just barely see those marks of branches, because what happens is where you've made an indentation, the paint, the pigment will actually settle into the valley, if you like. Didn't work that well with scissors. But I will show you at the end one that I did with a stylus earlier. I'm just going to add some colour to it as well. This could be a distant tree. It's quite moody and I quite like it. This is one I did with the stylus a few months ago. So you can see how the paint is sitting in the indentations, and you could add some colour as well to it. I'm going to go back into these because this is all about playing, and just add some more detail. So this is dry and then wetting it again. Here, this one, I'm going to show you how you can sometimes just add a halo around the tree to indicate more branches. And so because it's a blue sky, I'm going to add a little bit of blue. It needs to be quite a pale wash. I've maybe made it a bit dark, but I will leave you the link to some videos where I have done this in the past. This one I'm just playing and adding a bit more of structure to the tree. So which are my favourites out of these? Well, I like the drawing ink, number 9. I also like the Hobbycraft markers, wet into wet, and the wet on dry indentations. I quite like that tree. It turned out quite nice in the end. So this is all the trees. I hope you've enjoyed my video today and that it will inspire you to go and look out your window at winter trees and create a scene of your own using some of these ideas. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video useful, then please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, happy painting. See you soon. Bye.